Let's go. Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel, Cynicalex, and I have finally buckled down and not only compiled the brand new tier list for y'all, but I also went ahead and revamped from top to bottom. I rebuilt, redesigned, all the other re's, okay? I completely redid the tier list, so I'm very excited about this. I really want to know what your thoughts and opinions are. I'm also very proud of myself because, you know, if you know, you know, I've been slacking on some of the other, you know, guides and some of the other types of you know, spreadsheets that I do. I'm not quite on my spreadsheet game the way I used to be, but for this one, I'm always gonna come out for you guys and do my absolute best. So we're gonna start off with the full view here. We usually don't do this full view. We usually do a more zoomed in look just to focus on the big dogs, but I want to just show you guys the full thing here, try to get as many of the characters because we got a lot of characters. Right, but I just want to explain to you how this flow works. Some of the tier list is going to look familiar. Most of the tier list is going to look brand new, so buckle up because it's about to get heavy. However, first of all, standard PSA. This is just my opinion. This is just the way I see the game. You're more than welcome to disagree with me down below in the comments. Just smash the like button before you do. That's sort of a prerequisite here. And you're more than welcome to, you know, you don't have to play the game the way I'm telling you to or I'm advising you to. You can play the game however you want, whatever way you want. This is just a guide for those that want it. So here we go. Let's jump right in. So what has changed? Right, some things have stayed the same, some things have changed. So what has changed is I've gotten rid of some of the icons, some of the little you know, icons next to the characters' names that I didn't think were really important, like needs tier 3 or transcendence, things like that. And I've added some really important tags that I think are useful. And I've also changed one of the existing tags. So I changed dies easily to no healing because I felt like dies easily is a little bit subjective in the sense that maybe you can play the character really well. Maybe you can play Storm really well and she doesn't die easily for you. Or if you build the character really tanky, they don't die so easily. So no healing is a much more helpful tag because actually nowadays, very few characters have no healing. You can look here and we have one character in the top 2 that doesn't have healing. And surprisingly, the further you go, right, to that side, you start going to the less meta characters, you start seeing more characters that can't heal. And that's not a coincidence. That's because some of the best characters in the game, or most of the best characters in the game, can heal, baby. The thing is, I added these 2 important ones up here. The hammer is for PvP, and the little puzzle piece is for needs a max build. Now, if you've seen my Wolverine video lately, you know exactly what it means for a character to need a max build. What that means is that even though the tier list is considering the characters at or near their max build, for these specific characters, if you don't meet those minimum requirements of almost going all the way, they're not going to perform very well. So a very good example, I mean, although Wolverine is a good example, Rogue is a really good example, right? A lot of people will tell you Rogue is very good for lots of different content, squad battle, ABX, World Boss Ultimate, World Boss Legend, even PvP. And she is, that's true. But for all of those PvE contents, you need to give her a CTP of Judgment. She's not going to cut it with a mind damage obelisk or a lightning damage obelisk. She's just not. With the CTP of energy? No. With the CTP of rage? No. It's very specific. So when it needs to be very specific and you need to pump a lot of resources into that character, in my opinion, they're going to get the needs max build. Now, this one's going to be a little bit subjective, like I said. So some people are going to say, oh, I think Daredevil really needs a max build, or I think Corvus really needs a max build. We'll see. I'll take it on a case-by-case basis, but for me, it's just my personal, you know, my personal secret recipe. And then PvP is the hammer, very straightforwardly. This is generally, my tier list is generally not a PvP tier list. I do not value PvP that highly because there are basically only 2 PvP game modes. There's Timeline Battle and Alliance Conquest. Everything else in Marvel Future Fight is PvE single-player content. I know there's Alliance Tournament, but yeah, it needs to be revamped. So because there is not a very big emphasis on PvP in Marvel Future Fight, there isn't one for my tier list. I want to mirror the game and I want to represent the game as best as I can, right? However, some characters are really good for PvP, like stupidly good for PvP, and there's still pretty decent characters in other content like Yelena or like, you know, Sentry or whatever. So I want to highlight that those characters can actually really bang, right? They can really go in and hang and bang with the greats in PvP. I want to highlight really good PvP supports like Ebony Maw, like Colossus. Actually, Colossus doesn't have the hammer, so I'm about to give it to him. So I also get the chance here with the hammer to highlight very, very strong PvP support type characters. So that's it for the changes to the visuals there. As far as the changes to the visuals here, I'm really happy with it, and I want to discuss it really quickly before we get into the new characters and before we talk about everything else. So from the left here, Please Rework is very straightforward. These are just characters that are, you know, borderline useless for the majority of more difficult content. Sure, they can do low Shadowland stages or low world boss stages. Maybe they can go higher if you have lots of Pierce, but generally speaking, you know, this is your lower end models. This is, you know, biking to work instead of driving, etc. Then you got your Shadowlanders. Again, these characters can technically do, some of these characters can do higher content, and you may need them for specific content. Like if you're trying to farm story mode fragments, you're going to need Nightcrawler Transcended or Elsa Transcended or whatever. But generally speaking, they're going to be used in Shadowland if you're climbing, and that's pretty much it for the most part. Then you have your lead support type characters. Now, I'm still sort of toggling, or not toggling, I'm still sort of mulling over, thinking about a way to highlight the tier 3 characters here, because there are a lot of tier 3 characters that I believe at this point in the game are best served to be just a leadership or support. And again, you can definitely use them for their content. You know, Magneto's here, Star-Lord is here. These characters are not bad. However, they have, you know, they're missing certain parts of the recipe that are not going to make them as good as these characters here, who are even borderline meta, etc. So most likely they're being relegated to the spot of lead slash support. I do this because, for example, right, a new player is going to gravitate towards the newest best characters anyway, so they're not going to be worrying about getting Magneto or getting Star-Lord. But for, let's say, returning players, right, they're going to look at their roster and they're going to think, oh man, Star-Lord's tier 3, he's really good. Star-Lord's not that good. He's not bad, but he's certainly a lot worse than, let's say, War Machine or Gambit. So you need to really make that distinction. And so, you know, in that case, these characters do usually end up getting relegated to just being leads or supports. But even newer tier 3s we've seen have basically just immediately gone back into the bin of support slash leader, i.e. Taskmaster and White Fox and Wave, right? Even though they got their big bump, their big stat bump, they didn't go anywhere. They still kept that same role that they had from day one, which is you're a support character or a leadership type character, right? So that's pretty self-explanatory here. This one here is for all my free-to-play players. I love you. So I just want to highlight, and this list here is going to be very tight. It's meant to be very, very small, and it's meant to highlight free-to-play tier 2 gods. This is a very specific list of characters that they have to satisfy the following criteria: be tier 2 only, be obtainable through bioselectors, you know, or I mean, and any other means, but they have to be obtainable through bioselectors, and they don't need a uniform. It's those 3 things that need to happen, and and the most important part, the character needs to be very, very strong. So this list is just for newer returning players to be able to quickly see who they can pick up or start working on that's going to make an immediate impact on day one on their roster. Because it's really nice to come to the tier list and say, oh man, Shang-Chi's really good, that's really cool, but I have a tier 2 Shang-Chi with no uniform and I don't have any CCF. Okay, so now you gotta start grinding, right? But in the meantime, you can go pick up Katie, or you can go pick up Scream or Cersei, and they're gonna start producing for you. These characters are extremely valuable, and in fact, a lot of them are better than some of the characters in these categories at tier 2. Like, would you rather have a tier 2 Silver Surfer or a tier 2 Ghost Rider or a tier 2 Scarlet Spider? Yeah, especially for PvE, I would much rather have a tier 2 Scarlet Spider. So I think this category is really important. Now, when we go over here to borderline, this basically is just this is pretty straightforward. So meta defining is probably the most abstract of the 4 tiers here. These are characters that I just personally feel have defined a meta in the game for a period of time. I'm not gonna try to narrow down and really nail down what the definition is, because players are gonna, I'm gonna get a lot of advice, and I'm gonna get a lot of suggestions on who should be here. The point of this category here, I've realized with the tier list, I have to keep this category as small as possible. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but essentially, if you start adding every best character to here, we're gonna have the same problem we had last time with the tier list, where the left side of the tier list just gets bloated, and then you can't really tell characters apart for why they're good. Obviously, when you see a tier list, you're gonna want to investigate further, and you're gonna want to go watch individual videos or read individual guides on these characters and figure out what they're best for. But take, for example, Doctor Strange. He basically has controlled the meta of Shadowland and now Timeline Survival, right? He's the #1 character for that content, and he can just cruise through every stage. Sentry, since he came out at the end of last year, has dominated PvP, dominated timeline battle and other things, and that has not changed. And so because he dominated, even though he may not be the best character for PvP anymore, people are gonna say, oh, Doom's better than Sentry. Maybe, but Sentry was strong, and Sentry was number one for so many months that he shaped the meta in PvP, and players in their heads were thinking, how are we gonna counter Sentry? And every other PvP character that came after was like, how does this character stack up to Sentry? So it's that sort of thing where this character is always gonna be a comparison to characters that come after them. Shang-Chi is probably the weakest character on this list for that, and probably Loki, just because they got their uniforms so recently. But I do think that as time passes, we will be, you know, my picks will be proven, and we'll see that these characters were and are meta defining. Moving along to meta gods, meta-ish, and borderline, it's pretty straightforward. These characters are just meta gods. They're not meta defining, but they're just the best of the best. Meta-ish is not quite as good as meta gods, and then borderline is you're starting to lose your grip here. You're looking like a support type character, you know. So a couple more updates, a couple more changes, a couple more new villains, and Thanos is gone. If the Eternals update wasn't coming up soon, Icarus would be gone, kind of thing. You sort of get what I'm going with this. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, that's basically the tier list. That's basically what it looks like and what the justification is for this new design here. I really like it, but I would love to hear your opinions, because of course I'm making this for you. I mean, I'm making it for myself, but I'm also making it for you, so I want to hear what you have to think. Now, as far as the new characters go, we're going to go all the way back to the Shang-Chi update, which of course I think that he's, you know, he's basically, in my opinion, the best combat type right now, the best for PvE, and the best or the second best for PvP, which is wild to say for a combat type to have that flexibility, but Shang-Chi really does have it. That third skill, like the AI just spams the third skill constantly in PvP, and the fact that he has two skills, right, 6 and 3 both give him iframe ignore, is just way too powerful. He's extremely difficult to play, one of the hardest characters I've ever had to master, but it's so satisfying to see him just completely melt the faces of bosses. He carried me through stage 40 to 44 of Null, which is unheard of, which was unheard of for me until now. And he can easily crush Mephisto as well, and he can survive, right? He heals 60% every time he pops his third skill, and then he heals 100% on the tier 3. There's just so much offense and defense. It boggles my mind, and so that's why he's there. But that was basically it for that update, right? Katie, very, very good free to play, but not gonna really move the needle for anyone who's looking at the tier 3s and up. And so that's another thing I need to point out about the tier list at large, is I've highlighted these 4 categories because apart from a couple of characters, everyone else here is tier 3 or transcended. That is intentional because that is where the game is moving, right? Story mode ultimate fragment farming, world boss legend, dispatch, some stages of dispatch, you got timeline survival. It's all of this sort of content is requiring you to bring tier 3 or transcended characters. So that's why this side of the list is only going to feature the best of those 2 types of characters. Now we do have a couple. I think actually Icarus might be the only one who isn't tier 3, but he'll be tier 3 very soon as far as the data mines and things go, in Colossus. But otherwise, yeah, they're all tier 3 and transcended. So it's important to highlight that. But yeah, these 4, basically, if you have characters from these 4 categories, you can cruise through most of the content in the game. If you have characters in these 4 categories, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But yeah, so that's why Katie sort of falls here. She's really good. In some senses, she's better than some of these characters here. Like again, I'd rather have Katie than Arrow transcended. Like the amount of resources I'm gonna, or Dr. Octopus, I'd much rather have Katie and spend the resources on Katie than transcend Dr. Octopus to see what he does, right? Because he can't do much. He can do the one shot, and that's basically it. And he can do some squad battle, right? And he's not even best or second best for that. So there's Katie, and then Wenwu, unfortunately, I think he's just a leadership support at this point in the game. He just doesn't bring enough to the table, doesn't move the needle enough to really do anything and compete outside of that. And on top of that, he's a premium character. Moving on to the part of the update that, well, actually we have Wave, Swordmaster, and Arrow. Arrow, I think, is a little bit better than Swordmaster. Swordmaster kind of let me down, but again, she came into it already at borderline because they just didn't address enough of the issues with the character, and they didn't really rework her well enough. Wave, same sort of thing. They didn't really change any of her skills. They just gave her a new 6th skill, added a couple hits to 5 and 4. But when a character is already in the bottom 20%, if you only tweak them by 20%, they're not really going anywhere. So unfortunately, I mean, what Wave does well, she does very well. She's a brand new leadership, which is amazing, and she has an amazing support passive, but that's all she is. And that's sort of unfortunately where it's going to land and where it's going to sort of stay for them. So they didn't really move the needle at all, those three. And that's essentially the Shang-Chi update. Now, the mid-month update was quite a bit more of a push. Actually, we got to get rid of this for Sharon Rogers. She is no longer hard to play. So Sharon Rogers and Luna Snow both got upgrades that made them so much easier to play that they lost their hard to play icon, the little controller icon. And that really shows you where the game is going as far as the devs trying to make characters a little bit less complex and a little bit more predictable. But, you know, getting rid of the refresh for Luna, adding the fourth skill that doesn't let you get interrupted for Sharon. And we see that again repeated in characters like Captain America, where otherwise he was extremely difficult to play. Now he's pretty dang easy to, like, he's much easier to play than he was before. So we see that sort of, you know, cascading into these reworks. But yeah, Luna Snow got a big bump, but she was already pretty much at the top. Same thing with Sharon Rogers. And then White Fox got, again, she got a 20% bump, but she was in the bottom 20%, so she wasn't going anywhere. Crescent, basically just ABX, right? You can make her work for ABX for female combat hero, but otherwise she's basically, if it wasn't for ABX, she would be in the lead / support category. And that's why she gets the needs max build, because if you're going to use her for ABX, then you need to go all the way to try to squeeze out every last point, which means you got to slap a bunch of Odin's Blessings on her. She needs a Rage CTP, she needs a Mythic Uniform, right? You're building Crescent for ABX with a half-ass build, you might as well just stick to Valkyrie, who's just a better character overall, a much better support, of course, for World Boss Legend and stuff. She can hold her own in World Boss Legend on lower stages and things like that. So yeah, Crescent was a little bit of a disappointment to me, especially compared to Sharon and Luna. They didn't really uncomplicate her build and her skill rotation, which they definitely could have. And I feel like they really just didn't move the needle enough for her. And her rework ended up landing her somewhere between Wave and Luna, or Wave and Sharon, where it should have been much closer to Luna and Sharon, considering her cost and considering that she's an OG character. And then the most recent update here we got for Captain America, Wolverine, and then at the bottom here, you guys are probably wondering, where the heck is Hyperion? So Hyperion actually loses out the most. Unfortunately, as a universal type for PvP, he's got to compete with Sentry and Doctor Doom and these other universal types, and he just doesn't, you know, he doesn't really have the chops to hang with them. And for PvE, we just have better characters at this point. Hyperion's not really bringing anything to the table that we don't already have, and he has weaknesses like his lack of ignore dodge that you need to address immediately, right? Whereas, let's say Hyperion's a little bit better than Wolverine for PvE, for World Boss Ultimate, World Boss Legend, sure. But Wolverine has auto healing. Wolverine has 40% ignore dodge on his fourth skill. He has all of these effects that basically mean he doesn't really have any weaknesses. His weakness is just not doing enough damage. But Hyperion has these weaknesses. He's got healing, sure, but you know, not as much, and no ignore dodge. So he's got these weaknesses up front, and then as far as damage goes, he's not going to keep up with some of the bigger players like Scarlet Witch, Ghost Rider, Supergiant, Loki in the Universal class. Whereas Wolverine doesn't really have that much competition outside of Shang-Chi, Captain America, and Cull Obsidian. So even though we're not really that hype about Wolverine's PvE power level, you got to recognize he's the fourth best PvE character for stuff like World Boss Legend and World Boss Ultimate just by default. And he might actually be the best combat hero now for ABX. We're gonna have to wait and see, but his spot might move a little bit depending on what happens, if Captain America takes his spot or Wolverine takes a spot for best combat hero. But they're both basically competing with Venom at this point, and so Venom sort of takes a hit, gets a little bit of a drop here. But that's basically how it shakes out for Hyperion, Wolverine, and Captain America. I was definitely a bit wrong about where they landed. You know, I made that video saying all the characters seem like they're the same now, and although I stand by what I said from the point of view of how I feel, Captain America and Wolverine definitely got better reworks than I had initially anticipated. Hyperion, I may have actually overhyped. I may have been too excited. I still have some testing to do, so these three may move around a little bit, as I've said, but I may have jumped the gun a little bit on Hyperion in a positive way and sort of underestimated Wolverine and Cap and sort of had to walk back all three of those ideas. So, you know, it is what it is. This is why you don't want to come to hasty conclusions. You want to take your time and think things out and test things through. But that's it for the tier list for this month, guys. Hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what you think. And also, question for you before you go, is there a huge power shift coming in Marvel Future Fight? We know, well, if you don't know, I'll tell you now, apparently the next update is going to be Eternals mid-month epic quest. So the possibilities for the Black Knight dropping Gilgamesh or, you know, Makari and the other Eternals, and the possibility of Icarus tier 3, Cersei tier 3, etc. Are we about to witness, are we on the precipice of a humongous power shift in Marvel Future Fight? I love this whole, the hierarchy of power is going to change in the DC universe from the Black Adam thing with The Rock. But anyways, is the hierarchy of power in Marvel Future Fight about to change? We saw it last year with the epic quest for Sentry, Molecule Man, Moonstone. Are we in for round 2? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.